Hi, welcome to Latkes and Ketchup, the official podcast of Congregation Beth Israel in Charlottesville, Virginia. I am Rabbi Ezra Leventhal, the assistant rabbi here at CBI, and I am here today with a very special guest, a good friend of mine from rabbinical school way back in the day, a whole year ago, Ben Lux Morgan. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Ezra. Rabbi Leventhal, thank you for...
Yeah, we have to be formal now.
I know.
I'm not a student anymore.
And I'm bad at formal titles, just isn't my general jam. So I keep reminding myself of this after the fact. So Rabbi Leventhal, it is an absolute honor and pleasure and just true joy to be here.
It's Rabbi Ezra.
Excuse me.
Okay. I'll stop being a jerk to you about that. I'll stop being a jerk. So Ben, thank you so much for coming all of this way. Ben has come to visit for my installation tonight, which is very exciting. Ben, tell us about where you are in the world right now. Erev Rav, I suppose, is the appropriate title
Feels
for you.
Right. Yeah, I turned in my thesis literally yesterday, so I'm pretty sure that's Erev at that point, like right on the edge. Mm-hmm. Finishing up rabbinical school at HUC, as we talked about, in New York, although I live in Alexandria, Virginia for the moment, and I will be moving soon to a place I can't quite say publicly yet. But
yes, like all freshly minted rabbis, you will soon be shipped off to an undisclosed location.
You know, they just tell us, well, they don't just tell us where to go, but
they put you in a box. There's like a couple air holes.
It's very Barbie Ken kind of style of just like, you don't know what city you're going to be shipped out to and what big box store you're in at the other end.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I woke up here in Charlottesville, it was quite disorienting.
I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I will say my wife does keep saying when I'm like, I'm going to installations or somebody just had their installation, she's like, I'm pretty sure that's literally the scene in the Barbie movie where they're like, get into your box. That's what an installation is.
Yeah. So Ben and I met was your first year on the New York campus, and I had seen you from across rooms, and I had the thought to myself, I was not yet out as trans, and I saw you and I was like, I think he might be trans.
It's the look.
It's the look.
It's the...
You've got the vibe.
Yeah.
And so then I stalked you online like a responsible person and discovered that you were trans, and then cornered you in a room and said, I think I might be trans. Will you be my friend?
And every part of me was like, I think I'm supposed to practice pastoral care right now. And that's how we became friends, which is what's supposed to happen in pastoral care.
Obviously, yeah, that's the destination of pastoral care. So yeah, and you helped me through my little baby trans moment, and ever since it's been a great ride. We co-hosted at the HUC Kala, and we got to do voice training together. That was very cute.
We did. It was great. It turns out my voice is exactly at the level of the average male voice, which was a very affirming moment.
What a great moment of allyship from our vocal trainer.
Truly.
So in part, I wanted to have you on today in honor of a holiday coming up this month, Trans Day of Visibility. So today on the podcast, we want to explore some themes around perhaps gender bending, perhaps visibility. We'll see where it goes. So I must ask, Ben, did you bring the latke or the ketchup?
I brought the latke.
All right. Then you start.
Okay. So I'm going to tell a story that is, it's a midrash, comes from Pirkei to Rabbi Ezra, a sort of compilation of midrash, and it's one of my absolute favorite stories in all of Judaism. And it's not a narrative, it's just kind of an image. So the story goes that when King Solomon was in the process of building the temple, he really saw that loving kindness as a mitzvah and as a way of being was really one of the greatest pieces of what it is to be in relationship with God. And so he, when he was in the sort of planning meetings for the architecture of the temple itself, he said, we should have some specific gates for the people when they come to the temple on Shabbat or on festivals, because these dates, these times in general are really important to us as a community, but there are going to be people in our community who also have specific needs. And so there were like two very different gates. And one of them was a gate that the recently married would enter into. And if you were in these categories of the specialty gates that you would enter into, you would go one way and the rest of the community would go another. So they would pass by you if they saw you. And so if you were recently married, the community members would basically say, may God bless you with the celebration, the rejoicing of sons and daughters.
So would these be like couples going together through the gates, or is it just the like grooms?
Probably just the grooms.
Because women aren't people, right?
Well, I mean, this is a very old story. Let's be honest about Judaism's gender relations and separation. Definitely not a contemporary approach to. This is kind of a mechitza situation, right?
Definitely.
This is separation. So, like, let's be clear. This was to the grooms. Okay, we'll hold with that. But still, to the grooms, may you soon be blessed with the sort of rejoicing of sons and daughters. Because also, the Jewish tendency to say, so are you having children soon, is not new.
They were not terribly progressive when this was written.
No, but still, it was a sort of way of saying, we see that you're in this moment of heightened joy. Which, I think we don't necessarily always think about heightened joy as an unstabilizing moment, but it can be, right?
Definitely.
And when you get married, suddenly your entire sense of self has changed. And I think there is a kind of, as a trans person, I think a lot about gender dysphoria, but there's a kind of dysphoria of going into a new stage of life as well, right? And so I think having the community see you in that moment and say, we are happy for you and we see a future for you, right? There's a real seeing there and a way of being held, even when you're in communal space and communal time. And so that was one way people would enter. But then there was this other gate. So in this other group, there were two categories of people who were addressed in a similar way to the rejoicing piece, right? And so one of these other groups of people were mourners. So festivals actually cut off a mourning process. So in Judaism, so if you were an individual and you were mourning, you were still cared for in a sense. If you came to this space and you entered and you had a traditional way of indicating that you were mourning was you would cover your lip. So if in this other gate they saw people walking through who had their lip covered, the rest of the community would say, may God who dwells in this place, Hamakom, in this temple, comfort you. Obviously, mourning is an incredibly unstabilizing moment in our lives, and this space of saying, may you be comforted by God. We see that you are in distress. May you have comfort. I think to me, it's like, as far as I'm concerned, it's why we do this work.
Right.
It's the work of being with each other, seeing each other. I see that you are mourning, and in seeing you mourning, I offer you a blessing of comfort. It's holy. It's really, really holy.
Deeply.
And then there's this third category of people, and they would enter in the same space as the mourners. And this was people who were excommunicated. Now, in traditional Judaism, if you're excommunicated, it's not necessarily a permanent status. It can be, but it isn't always. There are ways that a person who's been excommunicated can repent, can do tshuva, right? But a lot of the ways that people who were excommunicated, a lot of the laws about how they moved through the world in this traditional model, it was almost like mourners. You can't cut your hair, you can't do laundry. A lot about laundry and death, by the way, in Judaism, weird overlaps between these. But so excommunicated people would still be able to come to the temple, but there were things they weren't allowed to do. And basically what people would say to the individuals who were excommunicated was, may God who is here essentially put it into your heart to listen to those who want you to come back to the community. And draw near to you in that. And so I think there's this triplicate thing we see about seeing in this story. We see people seeing those who are in the heights of joy, but also in the depths of grief, and also those who don't know where they are in relationship to the community.
Yeah.
And there's a real understanding in sort of not just the rabbinic world, but the sort of ancient Middle Near East, that seeing was actually this double act, that you couldn't see alone, you had to be seen back. That it was like a double cyclical process. And so I think really one of the things we see in this story is I see you, but also you see me seeing you. And in turn, there's a full seeing, even at some of the most elated but also most difficult moments of lives. And
Yeah.
that's the story.
Wow. I think that's so beautiful. I think it reminds me, before I did synagogue work, were you ever burdened with a life of working in an office?
Oh, God.
Oh, God. Okay.
So
So
much.
walking into an office, I feel like you're expected to just kind of have this flat affect. Whatever's going on outside the office is outside the office. And part of what drew me to synagogue work is that it's not like that here. I love that when you walk into a synagogue building, there are people going through all stages of life, and we talk about it.
100%.
It's a part of it.
It sort of, I think, one of the things that Judaism does really well, I'd like to think religion in general, but I know for certain Judaism does this really well, is it allows for the whole life to be experienced and held. It holds as its absolutely central principle that because we're sacred and created in the image of God, that actually the acts we do at their most ideal should be godlike.
Yeah.
We should offer comfort. We should celebrate. We should, frankly, rebuke when rebuke needs to happen, and we should pray together, and we should be in the full totality of who we are.
There's actually this quote that I really love that informs a lot of my theology that really reminds me of what you're talking about. It's Rabbi J. Michelson once said, "We are all God in drag." And I love this idea that whatever we put on ourselves, we all have that divine spark within us, and we find these ways to drag up what God is,
Completely.
And these are all different interpretations of what God is, and all of the different states of being also have that divine in them.
I mean, I think, if we really believe that the full breadth of humanity is created in the image of God, then God is inherently trans. God is inherently multiracial. God is inherently neurodivergent and, exists with different capabilities and capacities and abilities. And God also gets angry. And God also, does not want to come into work on Mondays, just like the rest of us. And God also is in our, in the greatest moments of sacred joy. And
Deeply.
all of that.
Yes.
I
And
love
such is our rabbinate as trans rabbis.
All it is, God is in drag, and
Yes.
the rest is a costume.
All right, you want to hear about the divine getting real gender bendy and multiracial?
Always.
You always do. You're ready for the ketchup.
I'm ready for the ketchup.
All right, well, the ketchup today is the history of ballroom culture, which I know is near and dear to your heart. Wasn't that a part of your undergraduate thesis?
Sort of. Part of my undergraduate thesis was about Sylvester, who was disco, really not yet quite
Not
ballroom
quite
culture,
ballroom, okay.
but certainly one could say a godmother of, no question.
A spiritual cousin.
No question.
No question. All right. So, for those of you who might not be familiar with the culture of ballroom, so drag, of course, has existed for time immemorial. As long as there have been people who have been playing with gender. But here in the United States, we've had a legacy of drag pageants going back to colonial times. And even through the 1950s and 60s, these were, for the most part, integrated events. But during the 50s and 60s, the black and brown queens at these events noticed that they were not getting their due. Is anyone shocked?
No. America?
I know, right? So there started to become this movement of queens that wanted to split off and kind of create their own thing. And this began with the legendary house of LaBeija. They were the first official drag house, founded by the grandmother, Crystal LaBeija. Some people think it's Pepper, and Pepper was the mother, but she wasn't the founding mother. Crystal is the mother. You got to be correct about that. So basically, the fun thing about the House of LaBeija is it wasn't really anything, and then somebody was like, we want to do our own pageant. We're going to sponsor it. We're going to call it the House of LaBeija. And they were like, what is the House of LaBeija? And they're like, this, what we're doing right now. This is going to be the House of LaBeija. And so it became. I mean, how else do you start something?
Where within the United States was this at?
New York City.
Of course.
Of course.
Center of the universe.
I'm from the West Coast, so I can't co-sign it, but you've said it. So,
and also, I just like to quote Rent, as we do.
Yeah, we have our roots.
We
know
do
where we
have
come
our
from.
roots.
So began the spirit of ballroom. And ballroom was a drag pageant, but it had a really different spirit to it. The more traditional drag pageants were very much about presenting one specific kind of femininity. They would call themselves female impersonators a lot, and it was... you were trying to look like whatever movie star of the time. Some of the girls in Paris is Burning said that the original was they wanted to look like Vegas showgirls, and then they wanted to look like Hollywood girls. But ballroom created all of these different kinds of opportunities because they would present different categories. So the categories would, of course, there were things like body and face, but they would have executive realness, where people were wearing business clothes. They would have school realness. I watched Paris is Burning to prepare for this.
Amazing.
And during the school realness, literally this girl comes out and opens a textbook and starts reading it on the runway, and everybody's just like, yes, and she's sitting there reading.
Well, because it's the performance of what is this thing that we're embodying, right? What are the symbols and the structures that we are, yes, parodying, but also saying what is it about us and how we engage with this as opposed to the world around us, right?
Exactly. So I pulled a couple quotes from Dorian Corey, who is one of the, big queens of the time. She was in Paris is Burning. She was really big in the 80s. In real life, you can't get a job as an executive unless you have the educational background and the opportunity. Now, the fact that you are not an executive is merely because of social standing in life. Black people have a hard time getting anywhere, and those that do are usually straight. In a ballroom, you can be anything you want. You're not really an executive, but you're looking like an executive. You're showing the straight world, I can be an executive if I had the opportunity because I can look like one. And that is like a fulfillment. So it's this really beautiful thing. I think that ballroom creates this opportunity for people that feel really hopeless in terms of their understanding of whether or not they're going to be seen.
Completely. Well, and also sort of both allows for the capacity for somebody to say and show and be seen as, I should be an executive, right?
Yes.
If the world was just, this would not read like drag, like a kind of implied, if not parody, at least a prism that isn't the normative, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it also gives one the capacity to be like, I am an executive.
I can be in this moment,
right.
And I can walk into a room and people are going to cheer for me. Right. And so I really liked the idea of when you told me about your midrash from Solomon, I thought it was really interesting to compare these two moments because the whole point of ballroom is to be seen. Right? That's the whole thing. The whole action. You go there to be seen. You go there to see.
Right.
And it gives you this moment of, I'm never going to be recognized like this on the streets of New York. But here, with my people, I can walk in here, I can bring whatever outfit I want, and people will actually see the person that I am inside.
Well, and I'm thinking about also just in terms of Pose in particular, the show, right?
Yes.
I love the opening scene of Pose, right?
Yes. With the museum theft?
With the museum theft, I think it's one of the most brilliant sort of segments of television ever made.
It's so good.
And part of what, so if you haven't seen it, part of what happens in this is there's two sort of different scenes being shown overlapping with each other. And one of them is a ballroom, is the actual ballroom where they're having a category, and the category is royalty.
Yes.
And it's sort of the Billy Porter, who's the MC of the whole thing, has this incredible speech about like what royalty is. It's about you own your man, you own your jewels, you own your land, you have power, and you are seen as such. And as this is being said, and as you see some of the sort of mediocre royalty,
people wore what they had.
People wore what they had.
Yeah.
It's interspersed with this other group of characters who are literally robbing a like museum that has like the like actual European royal clothing and jewels and so on and so forth on display. So they're robbing it, and they go to the ball, and like the mediocre sort of drag in the scene, they're sort of saying like, really, this is the best you can do for royalty. And then this final house that had stolen all of these actual clothes, which are, we should say, not based, but earned with stolen wealth in a whole bunch of ways, right? Mm-hmm. They sort of burst into the scene, and it's just this incredible showing of, grandiosity and royal nobility, and
they look so
they look amazing. It's you don't have to go and watch all of Pose, but go and watch the first scene. It's incredible.
I actually, in preparing for this episode, I wanted to see if that was a real thing. And there are some people that claim that there was a group of queens in the 60s that stole a bunch of wigs from the Met. But I couldn't get it confirmed. But I am hoping that it's based on reality, because it feels true,
It feels like a legend, right?
I mean, like a legend.
Actually, just to bring it back to the royalty and the scene, like, look, do I think that the temple necessarily actually had these spaces of people saying, may you be comforted, may you rejoice, so on and so forth? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if I believe that King Solomon is real, but I know that I believe that the space of what this legend means for the community is real.
And I think that the writing of it matters. You know what I mean? Like, whether or not it's a physical creation, it's an ideological creation. And it's something that we've chosen to keep for generations and generations. So,
well, and I think there's also something about this idea in both of these about what does it mean to have a space to gather for your community,
right?
And how do you make sure that like your community is seen in that gathering? Mm-hmm. And in Solomon's time, this was about language related to God, right? And may God notice you in this moment in this specific way. In drag balls, look, I think a drag ball is a pretty holy space, but I think most people don't necessarily associate them with sacredness.
Right.
But they are about communal structures of care.
Yeah, there's such an attentiveness to what each person walking in needs. In fact, during some of the categories, they would have one of the famous categories, Butch Queen, First Time in Drag, and they would specifically instruct the crowd every time, like, everybody who comes to these balls has had a first time walking in drag. You need to clap it up for these girls. They are being brave coming out here. And so it wasn't about whether or not you were really achieving quote unquote realness. It was about celebrating who you were and trying to make sure that as long as you were in this space, you felt what was really inside you was being seen.
Well, and realness is not necessarily about like a excellent, proper, true.
Oh, it depends who you ask.
Well,
man.
that's fair. That's fair.
A lot of the queens in Paris is Burning would say specifically that realness was about unclockability. And like there's a lot of stuff in Paris is Burning that if we look at it now, especially, as trans people in 2025, it's going to feel a little bit problematic. But like that's the culture at the time.
Well, I mean, unclockability is also about safety, right?
True.
So I don't mean to dismiss any of that.
Yeah.
But where I was going is realness is about a kind of sense of surety of self.
Yeah.
Right? And so if surety of self is being held in your heights and in your lows and in your difficult moments where you don't know where you're fitting, and also, frankly, the mundane life that you want to present to the world as well, then I do think realness is also about seeing and being seen.
I think that there's actually a really interesting kind of dichotomy between the people walking into the temple and the people walking balls. Because what you were saying with people who have just gotten married, people who are in mourning, people who've been excommunicated, there's a certain unsurety of self.
Totally.
There's been a radical change to who you are. They're not sure where they're at, and the communal response is to give them that surety, to give them this sense of, may God give you that surety back. And in ballroom, you walk in a ball because you know who you are inside, and that's what you're supposed to convey.
Or you're figuring out who you are inside,
Yeah.
right? Because that's the other piece, is it's space to play.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the temple was a space to play. Probably not.
Probably not. We can dream.
Look, priestly garb is obviously drag, but
Obviously drag.
Okay, maybe that's a little facetious, but in all seriousness, we take priestly garb seriously, right? We take the garb of royalty seriously. That's what we were talking about before. We take what we present to the world as a serious reflection of who we are, and we see each other based on that. And so, of course, it's performative,
Right.
But performance is definitely real, and I think there is something about the holy self we put forward, and its recognition.
Right. And that, to bring it back to Trans Day of Visibility a little bit, Trans Day of Remembrance was created before Trans Day of Visibility, and trans activist Rachel Crandall Crocker decided that this was not a holistic celebration or recognition of who trans people are, and wanted to create Trans Day of Visibility because of how important it is for us to be seen.
Right. And if you're not seen, you don't exist.
Right. And there is so much about transitioning that is being seen. Like, when you start moving through the world and you know that you're on hormones and nobody else can see it yet, that's such a sad and like a space of longing,
Well, but also I will say, we in the trans community, the space of longing that we talk about wanting to be a self, I think it often gets reflected into the larger non-trans community at large. As a lot of people know, I think about dysphoria, about the space of feeling like you're wrong. There's a concept in the trans community of gender euphoria,
right?
Which is the moment in which you suddenly start to see yourself, or the moments, it keeps going, I promise it keeps going, where you see yourself as you know yourself to be. And it's euphoric. It's holy. To me, it's as sort of, it is seeing the image of God in myself. Yeah. And it's it's necessary to be seen in our full selves.
One of the reasons I theorize that we're seeing more and more trans people joining the, team of clergy across religious denominations, is that to be trans inherently takes this concept of vision. You need to be able to see in yourself this person that nobody else sees. You need to have that kind of, we talk about in clergy school acting as priest, pastor, prophet. You need to be able to be prophet to be trans inherently. You need to be able to have this kind of self-reflectiveness.
Yeah, one of my favorite takes on what a prophet is, I think in popular culture at large, people think a prophet is somebody who can see something that's going to happen. And that is part of a prophetic orientation, but really a prophet is somebody who has the capacity to name a truth that has not been yet named, and to see the truth that can be. And I think, for trans people, there is an innate prophetic vision in that.
We love to see the truth.
We
as
love
trans
to see
people.
the truth.
I have an important question about your truth.
Wonderful.
Ben Luxmorgan.
I have so many truths.
What condiment would you personally put on your latke?
Okay. So I have a slightly controversial take on this.
Oh, I love controversy.
So first off, the answer is always both together, applesauce and sour cream.
Okay.
But if you throw on hot sauce on top of it,
oh, that is not controversial.
I've had a classroom of people yell at me about how disgusting it sounded. So I'm just saying, it's amazing. Don't knock it until you've tried it. It's
Ben,
the best way to eat latkes.
I affirm your sacred truth. I think that it really captures the whole samin nosrat, salt, fat, acid, heat. Completely.
Yes.
Yeah. It's the complete package.
It's prophetic is what it is.
That too is God in drag. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you for helping us honor Trans Day of Visibility. And for those of you out there who might be CBI members and attendees, we will be honoring Trans Day of Visibility on March 28th during our Shabbat service. Come and join me for that. Sometimes we've got a plug. Sometimes there's an intention with the theme.
I mean, look, anything that's not plugging at the end of it is, as far as I'm concerned, like, why are you doing it? There's got to be something we're moving towards. So
sometimes my sacred truth is shameless self-promotion. So
I would say communal promotion.
That's
what you're doing.
We love community.
We love community. And, we like to talk about that, like, very common overlap of First Temple era communal norms and drag ball in the 80s communal norms. And I know it's an old hat.
Yeah.
But thank you for having this conversation.
Look, it's what I'm always saying. That's my Torah.
That's our Torah.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Latkes and Ketchup. I'm Rabbi Ezra Leventhal, and I'm going to dip.